1765. Boston Harbor smells of salt, tar, and fear. A mob surrounds the home of a British tax official. Windows shatter. Furniture is dragged into the street and burned. By morning, the man who was supposed to collect a new British tax has resigned before he's even started the job. This is not rebellion yet, not officially. But it is the first spark of a fire that will, within 11 years, burn down an empire's grip on a continent. To understand why, you have to go back 2 years earlier to the moment Britain won everything and started losing it all. 1763. The 7 Years' War ends. Britain has crushed France and Spain, seizing Canada, Florida, and vast stretches of territory across North America and India. The British Empire now spans the globe. But victory has a price tag. The war has doubled Britain's national debt. Interest payments alone eat up more than half the government's annual budget. And now Britain must defend and administer an empire larger than it has ever controlled. 13 colonies sit along America's eastern coast, home to more than 2 million people. Puritans in Massachusetts, Quakers in Pennsylvania, planters in Virginia and the Carolinas, where slavery underpins the entire economy. For generations, these colonies have governed themselves with little interference from London. That relationship is about to change. British Prime Minister George Grenville looks at the empire's finances and reaches an obvious conclusion. The colonies should help pay for their own defense. In 1764 and 1765, Parliament passes new taxes on sugar and on virtually every piece of paper used in colonial life, from newspapers to legal contracts. The Stamp Act. It seems reasonable in London. Englishmen have paid similar taxes for decades. But in America, the reaction is fury not just at the cost, but at the principle. These colonists have no representatives in Parliament, no vote, no voice. Grenville insists they are virtually represented, their interests looked after by British MPs in a general sense. Few Americans are persuaded. A phrase begins to spread through pamphlets and taverns. No taxation without representation. Remember that phrase. It will outlive Grenville, outlive the Stamp Act, and become the fuse for everything that follows. Under pressure, Parliament repeals the Stamp Act in 1766. The colonies celebrate, but on the very same day, Parliament declares it still holds full authority to make laws binding America in all cases whatsoever. A concession wrapped around a warning. 1767. New taxes arrive, this time on glass, paint, paper, and tea. Colonial resistance sharpens. Boston becomes the epicenter, a city crowded with radical merchants, unemployed sailors, and a simmering resentment of British troops who now patrol its streets. On a cold March evening in 1770, that resentment boils over. A crowd surrounds a small detachment of British soldiers, hurling insults, ice, and stones. No one is ever quite sure who gives an order, or maybe just panics. Muskets fire into the crowd. 5 colonists lie dead in the snow. The Boston Massacre becomes a piece of political theater almost overnight. Engravings of the event circulate through every colony, exaggerated and furious. The British soldiers are put on trial and, defended by a patriot lawyer named John Adams, are largely acquitted. Justice, in its way, is served. Tensions ease. Most of the new taxes are repealed. Except one. A small tax on tea remains not for the money, but to prove a point. Parliament's right to tax the colonies is not up for negotiation. That single, stubborn tax will light the next fire. By 1773, the East India Company, the largest corporation in the British Empire, is drowning in debt. Parliament throws it a lifeline, the right to sell tea directly to American colonists, undercutting local smugglers, but still carrying that small symbolic tax. To Britain, it's a bailout. To patriots, It's a trap. Accept the tea, and you accept Parliament's right to tax you without consent. On a December night in 1773, a group of men calling themselves the Sons of Liberty board 3 tea ships in Boston Harbor, disguised deliberately as Native Americans, a costume meant to signal a new identity, American, not British. They break open hundreds of chests and dump 92,000 pounds of tea into the water. A fortune, destroyed in a single night, worth close to $2 million today. Patriots call it glorious defiance. In London, it looks like something else entirely. An attack on private property, a collapse of order, an insult that cannot go unanswered. It doesn't. In the spring of 1774, Parliament unleashes a series of punishing new laws on Massachusetts, closing Boston's port, stripping the colonies' self-government, quartering British troops in colonial homes. Americans call them the Intolerable Acts, and rather than isolating Massachusetts, as Britain intends, the crackdown does the opposite. The other 12 colonies rally behind it. That autumn, 52 delegates gather in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress, the first time the colonies have ever formally acted as one body. Among them, Samuel and John Adams from Massachusetts, and a fiery young lawyer from Virginia named Patrick Henry, who is already speaking of something most delegates still consider unthinkable: full independence. For now, moderation wins. The delegates agree to boycott British goods and send one final petition to King George III, professing loyalty even as they list their grievances. The king never responds. By the spring of 1775, Massachusetts is a powder keg, quite literally. British General Thomas Gage worries about colonial gunpowder stockpiles scattered across the countryside, guarded by increasingly organized local militias. In April, he orders a detachment to seize rebel supplies in the town of Concord. But the Patriots have their own intelligence network. Riders among them, a silversmith named Paul Revere, gallop through the night to warn the countryside. The British are coming. At dawn, on the 19th of April, 1775, roughly 70 colonial militiamen face a column of British regulars on the village green at Lexington. Someone fires history, has never determined who. Within minutes, 8 Americans lie dead. The British march on to Concord, where hundreds more militia have gathered. This time, it's the British who are forced to retreat, harassed the entire way back to Boston by colonial marksmen firing from behind trees, walls, and farmhouses. By nightfall, 73 British soldiers are dead, 174 wounded. The Americans have lost fewer than 100. It is, by the standards of European warfare, barely a skirmish. It is also the first blood of a revolution. Within weeks, 15,000 colonial militiamen surround Boston, trapping the British Army inside the city. In Philadelphia, a Second Continental Congress convenes, and this time, there is no more room for polite petitions. They begin raising an army. They need a commander. The choice falls to a 43-year-old Virginia planter named George Washington, a man with more military experience than almost any other American-born officer, and, just as importantly, a Southerner who can unite colonies that don't yet trust each other. He accepts, refusing pay, taking only expenses. In June 1775, before Washington even arrives to take command, the British launch a bloody assault on fortified colonial positions outside Boston. The Battle of Bunker Hill costs Britain more than 1,000 casualties, a staggering toll for a single afternoon. The British technically win the ground, but the message is unmistakable. These are not the disorganized rabble London imagined. Still, King George is unmoved. In the autumn of 1775, he declares the colonies to be an open rebellion and begins assembling the largest expeditionary force Britain has ever sent overseas. Tens of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships, an overwhelming show of imperial force meant to crush the uprising before it can spread. But something else is spreading faster than British reinforcements can sail. In January 1776, a pamphlet appears on the streets of Philadelphia. It's called Common Sense, written by a radical Englishman named Thomas Paine, and it does something no petition or protest has managed. It makes the unthinkable feel obvious. Monarchy, Paine argues, is not just unjust, it's absurd. Independence isn't rebellion, it's common sense. More than 100,000 copies circulate through the colonies within months, reaching ordinary farmers and tradesmen who had never before considered a future without the king. By June 1776, the mood in the Continental Congress has shifted beyond reconciliation. After weeks of fierce closed-door debate, delegates vote on July 2nd to formally separate from Great Britain. 2 days later, on July 4th, they adopt a document written primarily by a young Virginian named Thomas Jefferson, a Declaration of Independence, built on an idea as simple as it is radical, that certain rights are not granted by kings, but belong to people by nature, and cannot be taken away. 56 men sign it, pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their honor to a cause that could get every one of them hanged for treason. Church bells ring in Philadelphia. In New York, a crowd topples a 15-foot lead statue of King George, melting it down into musket balls for the war ahead. The 13 colonies now call themselves something new: the United States of America. But a declaration is only words on paper. An empire's army is already crossing the Atlantic, and George Washington's ragged, untested force is about to face the full weight of the British military machine on the shores of a city called New York. Independence has been declared. Now it has to be won.